Hello and welcome to this session of The Person of the Therapist. Now, my guest today has decades of experience as a social worker, as a supervisor, as a clinic director, as a community-wide, broad perspective, grassroots work. Her perspective, her work has extended over decades. So I'm delighted and very pleased to introduce Peggy Higgins. Peggy, welcome. I'm so
Thank
happy
you,
that
thank
you
you, thank
be
you. I'm
here.
delighted to be here, Dee. Anytime.
Well, I gave you some ideas on how we explore the idea of the person of the therapist, and for our session, I really want to extend those walls out to you reflecting not only on your clinical skills as a social worker and those experiences with clients and your years of working, training, supervising, advising, and supporting clinicians, interns, as well as more seasoned therapists, and getting a sense of how did you really enter this field? Where are you now? And then we'll look at some of the wisdoms that you bring. To begin, how would you describe where you are on this lifeline of incredible experiences that you've had in mental health?
Where I am on the lifeline?
Yes.
Well, I'm not trying to be facetious because it's really true near the end. Um, I have done a long time. I've retired from my full time, which was certainly more than 40 hours.
40
Job,
years.
yeah, for 6 years ago, and
Uh,
then in the last year and a half, I picked up a part-time clinical consultant position. So I'll probably do that for a couple of years, but I'm more into um, to finding the next phase of my life rather than to be working in the field.
mhm. So retiring from the full-time responsibilities and now consulting, describe what it is that you do in the consulting process. What do you bring and who benefits?
Well, so I'm the clinical supervisor, the consultant clinical supervisor for an agency because they hired licensed social workers who need a licensed social worker to supervise them. And they
Hmm.
did not have a licensed social worker in that capacity
Hmm.
in the agency.
Hmm. So to give, I'm imagining that some of our viewers are just entering the mental health field or even thinking about it, and others are very seasoned. But to describe for our viewers, what do you do as a consultant? Like, what does that look like? And if you could describe some of that experience for you and for the supervisees.
Well, I guess I'm not exactly sure if I'm answering this kind of the way you're asking it, but um, it's a clinical supervisor role. So I meet with the clinician once a week and they present cases and we talk about their cases, etc. And I see my role in the same way the supervisor's role, you have to practice what you preach. So if you want the clinician to behave in a certain way towards the client, then you need to behave in a certain way with the clinician, because it's in that model that you're going to get that kind of work. And what I believe in my direct work with clients, as well as my work with the clinicians, is to emphasize the positive, to emphasize the fears or the emotions that are behind whatever's going on. And so, for example, anger is a constant theme, particularly if
Mm-hmm.
there's a frustration or anger. Well, that's the same kind of the same thing, just a little more polite. um, um, you know, um, Oftentimes behind anger, I've found that that's fear. And so if a parent is raging about the child not doing X, Y, or Z, um, I'll certainly accept that. And then also talk about if there's any fear behind that. And that can really get a shift in terms of what the conversation, what the parent wants for the
Mm,
child, what their fears are for the child, etc. So, so obviously the clinician isn't coming in with an anger kind of piece, but they're coming in with their presentation of the case, and my job is to really support them
yeah.
in terms of their what their end result they want from this and how much they're allowing the client to guide where they're going rather than the therapist coming up with a solution, because that doesn't work for any of us. And we all have our own stories and our own stories that we bring into a session. And so if the therapist is problem solving when the client doesn't feel heard, it just goes out the window. But so that's what I would say.
That leads me to ask you, how would you frame, what is your theoretical lens? And if that's changed over a lifespan, but this model that what you're suggesting is that you're modeling for the therapist who come to you
Yes.
on how to be and how to feel like validated, and then
Yes.
bring that to the families
Yes.
and the children. So what is your theoretical leaning? Has that
Can I just respond to that just real quick?
leads?
You're
Yes.
absolutely right, but there's another piece to that, and that's also to question.
Oh,
So, want to support the therapist in all sorts of ways so that they feel safe and supported. But you also are there to kind of question and to introduce doubt, because oftentimes people can get, this is what's happening, etc. And you don't know that. You only know what people have told you.
beautiful. Oh, let's
You know,
highlight that. That's
you
so
know,
beautiful.
and you think you know X, Y, and Z about the other partner or whatever, but they're presenting what they think is important, but it may not be total. So the
Mhm.
best you have
Mhm.
is a hypothesis. And if you introduce doubt and you have a hypothesis, it allows you flexibility to
Mhm.
take in new information and reassess for the benefit of the client.
Has this always been the model, the lens that you deal with supervision as well as your social work experience as a therapist?
No, no. I went to school back in the day where it was psychotherapy, it was analytical, it was the DSM model, it was the medical
Mhm.
model.
Mhm.
We were the experts, they are the them, and
Oh.
we are the us. And there was something damaged about the individual who would come to therapy. And all of those things I buckled with even back then, because I had, you asked about roots, and my roots go actually a little earlier, but in response to this specific,
Mhm.
um, so in 1974, 73, 74, I worked in a group home for teenage girls who were pre-delinquent, they called them. They're SINS kids, children in need of supervision. And so as a result of that, I then went back to graduate school because I knew there was more to learn than I knew. And when I would sit in those classes where it was all about the medical model,
Mhm.
that was I was rebellious. Um, it didn't make much sense to me. It makes sense, again, if you use it as a tool to help you to understand the individual in front of you. But it makes no sense
Yeah.
if you're labeling people, which is, of course, what the insurance companies require
Mhm.
in order. So you have to bring that thought in, but that thought shouldn't drive the train. The thought is another piece of information that may or may not be helpful. depending on what the DSM says some of the symptoms are, which can give you guidance, but it's not an authority in my world.
Let me, I want to take a look at something that's currently been going on in more recent decades, and that is rather than the prioritizing the analytic model, medical model now, it's more prioritizing a CBT behavioral model. And
Right.
it seems to me that over decades, there's been a very similar constraint to and a taking away from the client that I'm hearing you're concerned about. So, is that your experience? Is that your observation?
No, I mean, that's my observation that that's where it is, but I don't find that a positive approach.
Right, right, right.
We've had at the agency that I was at, we had tremendous success with child-centered play therapy, with sand play, with TheraPlay. We also use the models pretty extensively, relationship enhancement. And I have a lot of respect for brief strategic family therapy, which can restructure people. I've been present when I've seen that, and but I haven't had all the extensive training. It's an expensive training, but that also. So those models make much more sense. And I'm not trying to diss anything, even though I'm dissing them. That I'm not saying that there isn't a value in cognitive behavior, but they only work at a certain time
Yes.
with a certain client for a certain period.
Right.
Because if you're into my understanding of cognitive behavioral, you're into problem solving, you're into solutions, you're into behavior change. You
Yes.
can't change behavior until the person feels heard. So they're compelled to behave in a certain way that is maybe not available to why that is. And if you don't allow them the respect of whatever journey they're on, and you're going into solutions, I don't think that's now. If you've gone through some of that stuff and you can use some of those techniques, of course, the highest form of flattery is imitation. So you take what you need to
Yes.
help the person in front of you. But I'm not, I've seen too much success. I've seen, and in my old agency, and I've said this a billion times, probably, we worked with child-focused issues at that agency. And invariably, families would come in very nervous, very scared, sit very close to the door so they could escape as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And within probably about 6 weeks, the kids were running in. These are kids who have, a lot of bad history and running into the agency. And at least once every 3 weeks, somebody in the lobby would be singing. And I said, that's what we want, satisfied customer.
Oh my gosh.
I really, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to any other model, but I don't think you get that with something like child.
No, there is a difference between problem solving, which is really important, for example, with addictions, and then the child-centered, person-centered, and family-centered approaches, the humanistic, the Rogerian, Rollo May, and then the centering of child's just play
Yes,
as
yes.
healing, play as engaging and nourishing, and then connect healing for the whole family.
I wouldn't exclude addictions from the need to
Oh,
have a person feel heard.
absolutely not.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But
I mean, they're looking at their behaviors and stuff,
yeah,
and how does that align with things?
yeah,
And so I do think
different purpose.
you're headed for jail. What do you think? You want to change? I mean, those are
Yes, yes,
motivators, but
for sure. So
yeah,
CBT, etc., very powerful to anchor and ground that immediacy of problem solving, getting
yeah,
some appropriate coping skills, and then the description that you have, which is a very respectful honoring to follow the lead of the client and to
Yeah.
nourish the family and to
Yeah.
help heal the suffering that is permeated, and so much suffering. It's in the community, it's in
Yeah.
the family, and then held and carried by the individual.
Right. And generational.
Generational.
And cultural in some regards as well.
Yes,
And that it
for sure.
isn't, there was something that you said, I lost my thought. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go
It'll
ahead.
come back. It'll
Yeah,
come back.
maybe.
So,
I'm old.
if I heard you when you were describing the group home, in fact, that's one of the very first experiences that I had was with young adolescent girls, pre-16,
Yep.
in a group home. But
Yep.
what happened before that? Growing up, who was Peggy? And was there a thread that you remember? Something could have been childhood, adolescence. Were you doing therapy with your teddy bears? Just what? Where is what is the blossoming inside Peggy and who you were?
Well, I was a late bloomer. Um, but I've thought about that, and I think probably I can see there are a couple of things that happened with me. Number one was when I was 10, we lived in Arlington, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. And oh gosh, no, I must not have been 10. It was 13. And
Mm.
um, the March on Washington was about to occur. My father was somebody from the South and understood in a very real way the injustices that
Mm.
occur in this, not exclusively in the South, but in the South. So he was going and my to the march. And my parents spoke at length because we all wanted to go and they thought there would be danger. And so only my father went. But the fact that that was such an important conversation and a discussion and really a family conversation, I think really set the tone for me to be attentive to those kinds of things.
Mhm.
Um,
Social justice,
yes,
cultural awareness
yes,
began right in your family.
yes, yeah,
How
yeah.
valuable.
And my father did other things than the March on Washington, but in his work site, encouraging women and Black women particularly to move up the administrative change during that period of time was something I was aware of as well. Then there's another component, and I'm not really sure what I did, but I was extremely popular in high school.
Okay.
And the reason I mention that, because teenage girls, when I was 16, which is not a period where we as women or young girls are very collegial.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And yet, there was a big, big deal when I turned 16. They brought in 16 cakes, each with it was just wild. Now, it was a co-institutional school, so it was all girls on one side. And of course, was a Catholic school, and the principal got crazy because, of what was happening. And they all wore little buttons on, and she said that's not part of the
Oh,
uniform.
uniform.
So
Oh,
they put them inside their blazer. And then when they saw them, anyway, it was just wild. So
wow.
I recall that because there's something about my personality or something that anyway, um, that really brings people together or sees the positive in people. And so creates, now, I've never had anything like that happen to me again since 16, but I'm just saying
Mhm.
that also is a component of me being able to kind of have fun and get along with most people.
Oh,
Um,
there's some qualities in there, Peggy, that
Plus I
even
like,
as a 16-year-old to feel that presence, joy
yeah,
and support, and we're behind you. It just seems like a very meaningful
was,
message to the young woman. in you.
Yeah, yeah. They decorated my class chair. Anyway, the whole thing was some wild. So, and then in college, when I was a junior, no, it was a senior, our Easter break, we went to, it was a Jesuit school who I was one of 12 that drove down to Mississippi to register Black voters
Uh-huh.
for Charles Evers was running for governor, Medgar Evers' brother,
Mm, mm,
and was there for a week. And that was
wow.
clearly an eye-opening
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Mm,
Very, very eye-opening. Um, and in 84, there was a march. People were protesting outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in Fulton County, I think the name of the county was.
mm-hmm.
No, Fulton or
Mm-hmm.
Forsyth. I can't remember which one.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, they did not allow any blacks in that county, and that was in 84. And so people were in there during the day to advocate for Martin Luther King Day, and they got run out. And so 2 weeks later, there was a national march there, and I participated in that too, and was very troubled by some of the behavior of the whites, bringing bows and arrows to the to get people,
Oof,
and you know,
scary. That's
calling
very scary.
Coretta Scott King a professional widow, yelling it. It was just anyway. So um, those things certainly influenced me. Then after college, I didn't know what to do. I'm not kidding. I was a late bloomer. My mother was very worried. And so she talked to my aunt, and my aunt was a Franciscan nun who was working with delinquent girls at a residential facility in Ohio.
Mm.
So my aunt got me a job there, that I went to go see, do for that job, and it didn't work out. My aunt got mad at the other nuns, and so she wouldn't let me take the job. It's my aunt was something else. Anyhow, so but I was there for a week in this facility, which was 16 girls, really rough girls, locked in that dorm with my aunt, and it was just her. And she was just incredible with those girls. And one girl leaned over to me at mealtime and said, "You think I'm bad now? You sort of seen more of me before little nun got a hold of me."
Wow.
And they were just, and so I was hooked.
Mm,
I was hooked about people can change, and how just in the gentle manner with which my aunt treated people, how that change could come about. So I left Ohio with that week, and then went to back home, and then started applying for residential counselor positions, and got one. And then
mm,
from there, then went and got my master's degree, worked in
mm,
social services for 10 years,
mhm.
and then went to College Park, protected services mostly.
Uh-huh.
When I
Uh-huh.
was in public welfare, and then went to College Park and worked there for almost 30 years.
There's a thread that I want to just touch on, and that is the power of women, as well as your dad, and of religious women, of women who taught you and showed you a moral compass, or a way of being present to and respectful and caring and compassionate with other human beings. Do I does that is that something that you
Yeah,
embrace?
it reminds me of my aunt, another. She was a
Mm,
nurse, and most Franciscans were teachers, but she was a
right.
nurse.
Uh-huh.
And so she was at a veterans hospital in Ohio, and was very concerned about how some of the vets were being treated, and would raise an objection about how they were being treated, to such a degree that her life was threatened, and security had to walk her to and from her car when she left work, because she did not think how, you know. So
There's strength. right
up
there.
that, yes, that
Yeah.
she was going to do what was right and wasn't going to, yeah.
That's a quality that you reflect, that the courage from your story about the dad, huh? Your dad, then
Mhm.
that's courage, that's risk taking, and then you going down to support and register Black voters who are being certainly intimidated, threatened,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
dismissed. And so it seems like the through line here for you is a real willingness to step in with the kind of courage and risk taking for social justice, especially for African Americans, Black women, and seeing the progression over decades that folks, people now do not, who haven't lived through the 60s, the 70s, and as you said, right through the mid 80s and onward, are missing a part of an evolution, a revolution of peace and compassion, and boundary setting. Like, no, I can imagine your aunt accepting no funny business, at being loving and compassionate, and at the same time helping those young girls with boundaries.
Yeah. She got them to see them to help each other because the school was also residential and it was also part of that campus. And so if a girl in that unit got upset, and there were like 4 or 5 different units, but my aunt said they always give me the worst.
Of course.
Anyway, so those girls, if one of the girls in the school got upset, they were taught by my aunt to step in and help each other and calm each other down.
Mm-hmm.
That actually
That's,
got the other nuns kind of angry that, they were so respected. So, people are
wow.
people. But
Yes, but there it is.
but those
There, that's
girls would stick up for each other and calm each other, not in a disrespectful way to the other nuns, but
uh,
yeah.
but there you are with leading to your involvement in community, to your
Yeah.
supervision in areas with clinicians and with clients that are marginalized, and that and your continued awareness and
Yes.
intervention for how would you
Yeah.
say
Well, and I would say this, especially, well, it's always true. I think it's just highlighted a little more. The majority population wants that message to be as who you are and who we are. And the more dominant, and there's a wonderful book. It's by Ann Wilson Schaaf. It's called When Society Becomes an Addict. And it talks about that the major view is the white man's view of what society is, and that there are other truths that are equally true, but they don't get as much. And so women, minorities, gender
yeah.
issues, those truths don't come. And so I think what you're saying is those injustices still exist, and in fact, maybe more aggravated now, but that you have to look harder now to listen for that truth. You have
Mm,
to seek it out in a way because of today's society.
yeah, and to bring forward some of the history that's so
And
easily forgotten.
yes, and if you acknowledging and respecting somebody else's truth does not
Mm-hmm.
disrespect your experiences. So the intent or the effort to make it a divisive issue is not accurate. So, as an Irish Catholic, I can talk about Irish Catholics. That has nothing to do,
Right,
or my experience, but that has nothing to do or take away from somebody who's Jewish or,
right,
a Protestant or whatever.
right.
They are different truths, and they're, so anyhow, I'm done with that part.
When you were talking about clients bringing stories and say,
Yeah.
for example, rage and anger, and then how you work with the clinicians and
Yes.
helping them get to the word that came up was underneath the anger is the fear. And
Yes.
I'm hearing thread throughout the facing of the fear that your family did, the facing of the fear, the courage that it takes to face and name the fear and to point it out and to be very and even your courageous aunt seeing the fear with the other teachers, with the other nuns, and understanding the fear of the adolescent girls and creating invented families, the
That's
clusters
right.
of girls.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what she did.
It's amazing. It's
It's
I
incredible.
say amazing, meaning what I really want to say is we need this. We need this all over,
Mhm.
not just in clustered little shelters.
Mhm.
Uh, you brought two symbols, and I'd like to pause right here and find out what did you bring. I often ask therapists to reflect on to show the symbol in the camera, so and then to describe what it means to you. Is this a reflection of wounded and healing? Is it a reflection of the qualities of being a competent clinician? Is it a reflection of society and its suffering and healing? So we can look at this from a number of ways. What did you bring?
So, I I don't have a lot of figures. So if I had more of a choice, but I am pleased with what I found. Um, so this one, I don't know if you can you,
Oh,
oh
could you
shoot.
put it
No,
right up to the mirror in front of your face? Oh, perfect,
there?
perfect.
Okay.
Yes. And you
All
could
right.
turn it
Actually, you know
around.
what I can do is I can
Hmm.
get rid of, let me do settings, background.
I'm so glad that you're this expert with technology because I tend to stumble on these
Oh,
kind of.
yeah. Well, I do too,
Oh,
but
now there we go.
all right.
So
But I got rid of the
yes, the
so you couldn't see my messy house. So, but at any rate, hold on. Here I am. Upgrade now. Oh
uh-huh.
shit. I'm sorry. They want me to upgrade Zoom. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here it is. Oh,
Oh,
oops. Here.
I see words at the bottom.
Yes, it
A
says,
child. Mhm.
"See, I will not forget you. I have carved you on the palm of my hand." Isaiah 49:15. And
And
what,
that's a palm. It's a
yes,
palm of a hand
palm of my hand.
with a
Yeah.
child.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Uh-huh. What what came up for you when you selected this? What about this figure and also the message? This
Well, actually, well, there's several things about this that mean so much to me. Number one is my aunt made it.
wow.
So of course that's very, very special.
Yes.
The second thing is I really am and have become more so as I understand more, to be a person of faith and to believe that I'm not in control.
Uh-huh. Mm.
And so me pushing for different kinds of outcomes is not going to work. I do believe um, that God is in control and that there's a higher being that is really good.
Mm.
And I can be um, purposeful in my intent and in my efforts, but I really have learned or am learning and continuing to learn that I'm not in charge and that
Mhm.
the outcomes are not my business.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
in the
that's
palm of the hand
yeah.
really
Mm.
kind of speaks that to me.
And the figure looks like a child that's feeling very comforted, very
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah. Can you
Mhm.
see?
Yes, yes. So
Yes. Very much.
enfolding. And
Yes,
that your aunt that she made that is that's so powerful. That
it
is
is. It
so
is.
meaningful, so beautiful.
Yeah.
Her hands were in there.
Yeah. I don't, yeah.
Mm.
I don't, it was when she was a senior and they had her do things.
That's lovely. That's
Yeah,
lovely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And and it's also really, as we talk about it, how I've, in many ways, I mean, this is just a little, but in many ways, how I want to approach the clinician
Mm.
and how I would like the clinician to approach the
Yeah.
client
Oh,
in the gentleness,
yes.
not that I'm in charge, but in the gentleness.
Yeah. Yeah. That word gentleness just um, is so respectful and so kind and so um, welcoming. This is a safe. This is a safe human being, a
Right,
trusting human being.
right.
What
Yeah.
else did you bring?
Oh, okay. Yeah, you said two. So this, I
Look
really
at you.
think it's cool. It's a little wand with
Yes.
stars in it, and it
Oh.
goes up and down. And
Mm.
I thought of this because, life is a journey and we're always moving and it's always changing.
Oh.
And there's sparkles in it and sometimes there's not. So the
Mm.
movement and the energy of this is what I'm really attracted to.
Could you hold that right up to the and yeah,
Right.
look at that. Look at that. We can see the oil moving and the stars.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing too in this moment, Peggy, is you're moving it. So we have a hand
Huh.
in moving life events, not
Yeah.
being in control, but taking responsibility and then being whoever it is that we can be to make that movement in the journey that's and look at that Irish green.
Yes. And it's all together, I mean,
Yeah.
put it
Yeah.
in. And
Oh,
so those are
my.
my two items.
Thank you, Peggy.
You're welcome.
And if you were to combine those, if you were journaling or just reflecting after, and this I say for our viewers, think about if these two figures, and really we have three figures, the kindness and the gentleness of the hand and the child with the magic wand there with the floating stars. What is there about our universe that we need to be kind to, that we need to be gentle and to respect the inner child? And then how might these two symbols interact with each other if they were to speak to each other? We might imagine the child being delighted to see the expanse of creation and yet being held in all that is possible in
Mhm.
that universe.
Mhm.
Thank you, Peggy. I sometimes especially want to hone in on your decades of experience. Um, if you could recommend any changes that you think would be helpful in mental health in terms of deliver services, therapist training, what would you design? What would you use your magic wand, maybe, or the grace of the divine to encourage some refocus, some transformation in the way we treat clients or the way we treat therapists or the way our mental health system works?
Well, it would take a lot of effort, but I joined the group that thinks this medical model and insurance companies driving mental health services is not the most effective way. So, that would be nice. But, it's also the real world.
Mhm.
So if you're talking about, I think some of the things that I've come to realize, and I think it came to me when I was in Child Protective Services, and that's that the behavior makes sense. Um, so it's causing the person a whole lot of trouble or problems, but the behavior makes sense. And so if you assume that the behavior makes sense, it gives you more options in terms of how to think about the behavior.
Mhm.
If you
Mhm.
think it's just crazy, you have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So, so the things that I've learned is that for me, the behavior makes sense. Now, I may not be able to totally figure it out, but I'm going to have some hypotheses.
Mhm.
So it'll allow me to try to continue the journey and understanding what's happening. I wrote down the so the power of empathy, the power of listening.
Mhm.
And again, I'm not saying that the complete session is you listening, but
Right.
reflecting back and letting the person hear what they're saying and what's going on with them. Um, and and also then asking questions. But you add empathy to your
Mhm.
work. And that wasn't something that was ever that I don't recall. So, it was decades ago, but I don't recall that ever being in. I also don't think, I think it's important, and maybe we know this, but it's not something we think about all the time. But I think it's very important to be in the forefront of our minds
Mhm.
how courageous it is for people to come to therapy and how they might present as X, Y, and Z, which is why maybe parents are always pointing to all the things the kid is
Yeah.
doing, but to keep anybody from looking at what their behavior is. But if you respect that it takes courage and that it's a we and not
Mhm.
a they,
Oh,
and all of that, I think that can get you further along. I really value the profession's attention to trauma and generational trauma, and what people have experienced, and whether they're even aware of it or not.
mm.
I think one of the most important books that I read, and it was while I was many years ago in protective services, is a book by Alice Miller
Mm.
called damn,
Is that drama of the gifted child?
not that one. No, I mean
Okay.
she has written
Thou
that one.
shalt not be aware.
Um, Almost. The one in For Your Own Good.
Oh, for your own good. Okay.
For
Yes.
Your Own Good is
Yes.
the hidden cruelty of child rearing and the roots of violence.
Yeah.
And I found that book so hard to read, and I couldn't put it down. And it was also so hard to read.
Yes.
And then, Philip Griffin, who's an American author, wrote Behind There, Spare the Child, which talks about what it looks like in American society.
Mm.
And so, understanding that people have their own stories can help you help them better. And if they are objecting to something, or they don't want to look at something, to respect that, because that means the way I'm presenting it is not getting them, because they're trying to protect themselves, and they
Yes.
can't move unless they no longer feel they have to protect themselves. So, I mean, look at I think those are and conflict was a surprise to me.
Mm.
Therapy is really about conflict.
Oh, that's great.
And so you, as a therapist or as a clinician, really need to resolve how you handle conflict, because the person is either conflicted within themselves or conflicted with other people. But
Mhm.
therapy is about conflict. And if you, as your own clinician, haven't cleaned that up and
Mhm.
understand what your tendencies are to run in and save, or to make it minimize, or to bully people, to do whatever,
Oh.
you're it's not going to work well.
Mm-mm.
Um,
Mm-mm.
so those are the things I think. I think those are
You you bring to us an emphasis on empathy, deep empathy, not
yes,
baloney surface
right.
phony
Not
stuff, but
polite. Yes.
Right. And then to get there is to do deep Rogerian listening, really
Yeah.
going from the very beginning of our conversation to listen to what's being said and then listen to what's under that. Understand the coping
Yes.
that we shouldn't be stripping away, but respecting. And until the client feels safe, nothing's going to
Right.
happen.
That's right.
It's
And they never feel totally safe, but
right.
you can present it and then they can be who they can be. And your job is, and in fact, I used to say, you know, that, you know, if they're attacking you, you know, in CPS, that would happen on occasion. So people,
Sure.
you know, come after you verbally or whatever, you
Yeah.
know, anyway. So my job was really to run next to them, put my arm around them and fight them together, you know, that we're working on this together because, you know, they want to do what they're
Partnership,
doing, etc.
collaboration.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And the importance of expressive therapies.
Yes.
I really, because people can't often talk their ways through stuff. And the expressive
Yeah.
therapies allow you to do that, whether you know what you're doing or not, and fully, and you can heal yourself. And we've had, you know, such tremendous success with parents and kids and families with all sorts of issues, either through sand or through we
Play,
have a clinician that uses drums,
puppets,
puppets, you know,
dollhouse. So
play,
many,
play.
right?
I had a little girl who said to me once, "Who made up the rules for this room?"
I
She
love
couldn't
it.
believe her good fortune that she could do
That's,
most anything she wanted and could say anything she wanted.
and
I
that
had a
was in the
little
playroom.
5-year-old. Yes, that's right, in the playroom. And I had a little 5-year-old who said, "You mean I can say a bad word?" And so you're wondering whether you can say a bad, yeah, can I? Yeah, you can. You mean I can use the word stupid?
Wonderful.
So it's
Wonderful.
a joy. It's a
It
joy.
is. And we want to encourage people to look into the play therapies, you know, read Virginia Axline
Yeah.
and go back into, well, earlier history, Margaret Lowenfeld. And
Yes.
you named three authors I want to underscore today. Alice Miller, like read, if our viewers could read all of her books, I think it would be transformative for their
Yeah.
practice and for clinical programs. And
Yes.
the other two authors that you mentioned, well,
Oh, Ann Wilson Schaaf.
yes, Ann
Um,
Wilson Shake. Yes, she's got
who
more than
when
one.
I first read her first book, it was The Addictive Organization, How We Perpetuate Sick Organizations. And, you know, having worked in some, I found that to be, so she takes the addictive
Powerful.
model and she puts it into organizations. So I found that fascinating. And then I wanted to read her other books.
Yeah,
And
yes.
so When Society Becomes an Addict talks about how society, she's viewing society, and that word is the white man's view of the world, and that there are other truths in that.
The dominant view
Yes, that dominant view, but you need
has
to,
been white.
yes, and that you need to respect and male. And
Mhm,
so you
mhm.
want to read that in a way that allows you to say there are other truths around that.
Indigenous peoples knew this and felt this early on as soon as we started colonization, and it
Yeah.
hasn't stopped.
No.
It hasn't stopped. And that metaphor works also in mental health, whether it's our training programs, our graduate programs, our
Yeah,
internships. We don't want to be colonizing these eager young clinicians and their brains,
that's right.
but to open
Yes,
open them up
be
to
open. Yes,
self-awareness.
yeah,
And that's what I'm hearing you do with supervision, is to help and make it a safe place in supervision for those therapists to become self-aware and to bring and to respect their own fear, their own anger, and find ways that are not recipes, that all the
yes,
creative to play and to immerse and to get their hands dirty, to
yes.
give themselves permission.
Yeah. Yes. And I would like to follow up on one thing you said when you
Mhm.
talked about the trainings. So I certainly understand too, we all are licensed and then you have to get CEUs in order to maintain your license and
Yes,
all of those things. And if many of us will near the end of the time period as to when you're supposed to get CEUs, you
right.
scramble.
Yeah,
And so you take what you can get for the lowest price
yeah,
at the most CEUs.
right,
I
right.
understand that. I get
Practical.
that.
It's
But
practical.
but you want to also consider doing yourself a service and looking at to where your gaps are or
Mm.
where things you might need to grow in
Oh,
and finding those trainings
yes,
that will help
yeah.
deepen your practice and not only be technically compliant.
Oh, that's a deepening means immersion, not just a lecture or a short video,
Right.
but finding, as you said, those trainings that allow one to touch the paint and the clay and the
Yes.
poetry and the
Yes.
sand and the puppets and
Yes.
everything.
Well, and we're not here to talk necessarily about sand, but I know
Nope.
you offer that
Yeah.
and it's been just such an incredible, important contributor to
Thank you.
the agency that I worked with, and
Thank you.
um,
Thank you. My love, my
yeah,
passion, my
yeah.
life.
And your
Ground.
skill, your incredible knowledge and skill that you bring to it as well. Yeah,
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you. We want to encourage more reading, I think. Both of
yeah,
us are very interested in how there's foundational books that weren't published yesterday. There's foundational books that have come that we need to encourage people, I feel, as a professor of psychology. The gold mines started long ago. They weren't
yeah,
invented a year ago. And even some of the authors that you mentioned, and there's so much more. And we want to step into grief and loss and
yeah,
trauma and
yeah, yeah.
and yeah, to keep being informed. Um, yeah, building trust in the self. Um, Peggy, as we start to come to a close, what wisdom would you pass to our viewers? What is it from your heart and from your lifelong experience that you continue to cull, I'm sure? What would you tell them right now?
Um, I I think I don't know how long or where I've got this understanding, or how well I'm doing it myself. But I think that it's important for the clinician to pay attention to themselves and to pay attention to what we're reacting to as opposed to what we're responding to. Um, and um,
Mm,
and if we're reacting with energy, then that's probably, and what do they say? It's 90% family of origin stuff
yeah.
and 10% the current situation. And that,
Mm,
that can be in any relationship, but that certainly is important because if we don't take care of our own mental health, then it spills into what we expect to our clients or what we expect of our clinicians. And if we get quote unquote hurt feelings
mhm, mhm,
because somebody didn't do X, Y, or Z, that's the other person focused, and that's not going to help us be attentive to how to keep ourselves healthy. So, in order to do that, you do need balance. You need balance and not just all about the work. The work is important. It's overwhelming at times. Never ending at other
yes.
times.
Yeah.
And if you're a new clinician and you have your caseload, etc., and you're working in a less than healthy environment,
Mm,
um, you still have and this is what else I learned, you have a sphere of influence. So what can you do in your sphere of influence? If it's, you can obviously go somewhere else or whatever, but what do you have that in your sphere of influence that you can impact? And focus on those things. And I'm not saying don't leave or whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying about making it an environment that you can be healthy in and feel productive in.
Mm.
And instead of thinking, this is a stupid form, I don't know why they have me do this each week. If you're not going to be able to change the form, then what are you able to do? And most times it is the ability to work directly with those clients.
Yeah.
So watch out for yourself too.
Mm-hmm. Peggy, it's an honor to hear more about your lived experience and the DNA of where you came from, and touchstones along the way that continue to to ground you and to inform.
Can I just interrupt for a second?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say, because this conversation has helped me relive or understand that my path to mental health and to social work really is probably a less typical, and that it really was founded on community and community based.
Mm-hmm,
And so
mm-hmm.
coming from the group home, and then I worked in a psychiatric hospital, and then working in child protective services and public welfare before I really came to a more formal clinical role, really. And I don't think I fully appreciated that before our conversation.
I'm stuttering all here. Convents, religious, monks and nuns, the focus of community can be so positive and so embracing. And so that seems like something outside that may not have been immediate in your experience, but was an acknowledged support, a nest of community is important. Communication, even when we're so different, is so vital, and it's so important. And so I hear that also in your thread. Before you leave, I wanted to ask you, you had such wonderful wisdoms for our young people who are entering the field. And I'm wondering about those who are retiring or have retired, to bring us full circle to what it is that you wish to share or to say to them.
Well, I don't think you can have a career in this field, and maybe in any field, without having made mistakes. And I certainly have made my mistakes, and can look back at some of them with sorrow. But what I did when I realized that mistakes, and as I looked to really the final phases of any kind of career in this field, the way I reconciled them have been that I learned from them. If I can't go back and redo or don't have any of that kind of stuff, I learned from them. And then that learning helped inform me with someone else. So, I wouldn't necessarily go forward first with talking about mistakes, but I don't think that any of us can't look back and think, gee, I would have done that differently. So we do it differently. If you look at that honestly. The other thing, for instance, it's a wonderful profession. If they're experienced people, they've stayed in it for a reason. It's because, it's proved to be beneficial. And celebrate that. Celebrate the volume of work and the individuals that you've touched, and the communities that you've touched as a result of that work. And that's to be really the message, and what's really really, really very valuable and important.
Thank you so much, Peggy. You hold on. I'm going to say goodbye to our viewers. And thank you, viewers, for being with us. Check out the Person of the Therapist video series. And as Peggy has really encouraged and underscored, please take very good, gentle, kind care of yourself. Take good care. Bye-bye now.